Good morning, everybody. Happy day after Thanksgiving. Hope all my Patreon folks had a great Thanksgiving Day holiday. And just want to say welcome to those of you who might be test driving the Patreon platform today. Just a quick summary. Aside from the fact that you do get posts that I'm not posting access to on Facebook or Twitter or on social media or on the website. Post geared specifically for those on Patreon, and that includes perhaps more in-depth coverage when weather is not active, and really in-depth coverage when weather is active. So if weather is an important part of your daily decision-making process, you can consider moving along. It's just starts at just $2 a month, and this is one of the things that we do. Try to do it on a daily basis. It doesn't always quite work out that way, but uh, we do a live stream usually in the morning, just for Patreon members. And morning welcome to Scott, Stephen Franco, Dave DeBoer, Mark Glatfelter, and Ian Martin. Good afternoon to all of you. So if you're interested, just check it out. Check out the Patreon platform. All the posts today and yesterday, and all the posts today are open to everybody. So this way you can kind of give it a look. All right, so let's get going here. Back on the morning after Thanksgiving in 1989, where I had 8 inches of snow cover from the snow that fell on Thanksgiving Day, I woke up to a low of, excuse me, 11 above zero. That's the lowest I've ever seen during the month of November. This morning, I got down to 12. So I just missed by a hair, touching that 11-degree mark. It was phenomenal out there. This morning, the winds kind of dropped off to almost dead calm after about 3 or 4 a.m. And I think that helped knock off a couple of degrees here and there. And I did see some morning lows in and around where I am in the 12, 13-degree range. So it was incredible. Also, I think back to a few days ago when some of the temperature guidance was giving Newark, for example, a low of 12 on Friday morning, and it got down to 13. We had a number of records go by. For New York City, it was the coldest Thanksgiving since 1901. I think I posted some stats about it last night. It wound up being, I think, the second lowest low and the third lowest high uh, observed for Thanksgiving Day, even though the daily records weren't broken. And the Central Park record this morning was 14. It got to 15 overnight and sat there for hours. I went and checked to see if it maybe got down to 14 sometime in between the hours. I didn't see it on the stat board, but that doesn't necessarily mean it didn't happen. But I'm thinking it didn't because there's no statement from Upton that says that the record was tied. But Newark, Bridgeport, Islip, Kennedy, LaGuardia, any station that has a database that doesn't go back to 1901, more than likely either tied or broke a record this morning, not just here, but within a couple of 100 miles, because the numbers that we saw were indeed ridiculous as far as the lows were concerned. And we've actually bounced off those lows now, of course. So we're starting to see what I guess we could call a bit of a snapback rally here as far as temperatures are concerned, because the core of the cold air is gone. So as we are in the noontime hour, a lot of these cities that you see up in upstate New York and into central and northern Vermont, central and northern New Hampshire, they were all down below zero this morning. So these places have all kind of bounced back up into the upper teens to low 20s now. And we are in the mid to upper 20s, and even some 30-degree readings beginning to show up in some places. And the cold extended all the way down into northern Virginia, with temperatures this morning down in the teens and low 20s. And we're seeing temperatures right now kind of snapping back to the upper 20s and low 30s. So the temperature rally is indeed on the way. And by the way, look out to our west, because this is where our weather is coming from. These temperatures have snapped back into the mid and upper 40s, and even some low 50s now showing up in parts of West Virginia. So we do have the stark contrast here between the very cold Arctic air and then the fact that our average high is still up above 50 tells you that the atmosphere is going to want to try to get back to those levels. So we're seeing readings back through Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio, all in the upper 40s and low 50s at the moment. So that is our destiny over the next couple of days. You can't really keep it this, this cold for this long. To be under freezing for so many hours this time of year is really tough. A month from now, not so much. Actually, maybe even 2 weeks or so from now, probably it would be a bit easier under the right circumstances to keep those temperatures low on a continuous basis. But it's just too early, even for the northern areas in upstate New York and into New England. You're going to have a snapback. Here's a close-up view of what's happening right now. You can see all the wind barbs here are very light. Wind speeds generally under 10. In fact, most places under 5 miles an hour, with readings up around 30. 30 seems to be the popular number here across Long Island, New York City, White Plains 28, 25 at Poughkeepsie, 20, 30 at Newark, looking at Allentown up to 30, Philadelphia up to 30. So it's all going in that particular direction. Looks like Atlantic City at the inland station anyway right now is sitting at 36. So the surface map, as we take a look at the tight view of the surface map, we've got the cold high is literally right on top of us right now, and you're already beginning to see the return flow from the southwest to our west across western Pennsylvania and beyond. You've got the frontal boundary that is setting up in parts of from eastern Tennessee on up through western Kentucky, southwest Indiana, and north and west from there. And this is really basically going to be a warm front that's going to be coming through with some showers. By the way, you got temperatures right now in the 40s and 50s down, at least, I'm sorry, this is at 10 o'clock this morning, 40s and 50s down through Georgia, and then 60s and 70s as you get down into Florida. So Florida definitely escaped this cold shot of air. Radar right now a bit on the busy side as we look at that, and the warm air coming in, of course, is now producing some rain, and that rain is breaking out through Iowa into Missouri and northern Arkansas. One of the remarkable things with this transition over to the warmer air is that in the wintertime, you probably would have had at least a period of frozen precipitation, and then a changeover maybe to sleet, freezing rain, and rain. Not going to happen this time because of how fast the cold air is pulling out. Now, there will be areas to our west in central Pennsylvania on southward that might see some cold air getting trapped for a little while when this precip arrives. So there could be some freezing rain issues at the start. In fact, the Weather Service has put up some winter weather advisories up already over some of those areas. Let me see if we'll bring it up here so we can show you. And let me just open this in a new tab here. Okay, so where you've got those, the purplish blue, I guess that's how I would describe it anyway. I'm not the most color sensitive person in the world when it comes to discerning colors here. But that's all the winter weather advisories, the preemptive advisories that have gone up through central and parts of western Pennsylvania, mainly along the mountains or just east of the mountains down into eastern West Virginia, western parts of Virginia into western North Carolina. As that, when that precip arrives. If it arrives in quick enough where temperatures are below freezing, particularly in valleys where the cold air tends to get trapped, you're going to wind up with some icing issues for a little while, but then it's going to just go over to plain rain anyway. We also have winter storm watches up through southern Iowa, northwest Missouri, northern Kansas, back through much of Nebraska, and you can see this large area of winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings up in the northern and central Rockies, through parts of northeastern California. Flood watches up in northern California because of the heavy rains that have been moving in there. And we've got various winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories up for the state of Washington. So all of this part of the transition that we're going through. And in fact, when you look out in the west, and we're going to be paying attention to weather systems coming into the west now, because that southern part of that jet stream, the split part, is going to be bringing these systems in. So eventually they're going to have impact here in the east. A lot of rain right now in Northern California, or at least north of San Francisco, and on up into the northernmost part of the state into southern Oregon. You got snow going on in the mountains. A little bit of shower activity extends a bit further south, but there's not really all that much yet going on in Southern California, where we know they've had the fires, and you're starting to also now see some snow break out in parts of the northern Rockies and into the mountains in the state of Washington. So the West getting busy with its weather pattern. The rainfall coming up, and this is through the rain we're going to get during later Saturday afternoon into very early Sunday morning, could be on the order of 1 to 1.25 inches. Maybe some spots will push it up a bit higher. The good news with respect to all of this, unless you've got something planned for Saturday night, is that this should be out of here before daybreak Sunday, so that the daytime Sunday, I think, is looking pretty good. Now, the overall pattern, we've been talking about this blocking high that's developed northeast of Greenland to Iceland. At least that's where it is. That's where it was back on Tuesday. And of course, the trough that you see here in the east, that was that shot of cold air, ridge up in the west. That's how we get cold around here. And sometimes we get stormy with that. And you've got this deep trough off the west coast with energy beginning to come in into the west. We got the trough through and out of here. Of course, the cold air that came in Wednesday, and now that upper low is lifting out, getting this ridge that's building in today, followed by the energy in the west. You'll notice that the ridge in the west kind of temporarily weakens there, and you start to swing this energy eastward. The first arm is Saturday night into Sunday. The blocking high, meanwhile, is trying to kind of sandwich itself in between this upper low that's east of Newfoundland and lower pressures and upper air heights that you see up in parts of northwestern Canada. So it's trying to build there into Labrador, and indeed it does succeed in that. We've got another trough dropping in for early next week, and that's going to run another low, the one that is setting up with the winter storm watches that you see back, that we showed you back over in Nebraska and Kansas and into the Rockies. So that's that system that comes in behind the one that we're getting for Saturday night. So we get a break on Sunday, and then probably some more rain coming in later Monday into Monday night as this upper trough swings around. The block, meanwhile, has kind of parked itself in Newfoundland. So that blocking low is just going to kind of get trapped here. And what we're going to watch for, I think it's a long shot, but if you notice as it rotates, it kind of stretches east-west, okay? And the western part of it swings another short wave down and around toward the coast around the middle part of next week. The problem here for storminess is the fact that the trough is right on the coast. It's not, if it would need to be about 300 miles or so further to the west for it to become problematic with regards to some kind of low forming along the east coast. It would seem to me, that the fact that you're not seeing a big ridge trying to pop up in the west is telling you that this trough is just going to be too far east. You're going to get some kind of load that's going to develop, try to develop over the middle of next week, probably off the southeast coast somewhere, and just basically go out east-northeast. But if you were to get, for example, at this stage, if you were to get, say, a much deeper trough off the west coast, build a much stronger ridge up in the west, then maybe this thing would stretch back a little further west and swing around, and you might want to try to bring something up a bit closer. It would also bring in colder air. There will be another shot of cold air coming in during next week, I don't think it will be as fierce as what we just saw, but it will still keep us in a regime of below normal temperatures. Now, longer term, the question about the block is, and this is something that we've touched upon, is how as you go through time with the models, the blocking, the way the models handle blocking is very unstable, and it makes for very tough forecasts. One of the things that the GFS is doing is that it kind of weakens that block quite a bit, and it's just about gone by the end of next week. The blocking high is anyway. So you get a ridge that builds in the east instead, so that when the next weather system that comes out from the west for in the long range winds up going toward the Great Lakes as opposed to coming toward the east. If you think back earlier this week, the block was forecast to hold in a strong way for a much longer period of time, but the GFS at least has kind of trended to this idea where the blocking high basically weakens, and that starts to make things move along from west to east, and you're going to start to try to take storms more to our west than actually tracking them to our south. But you know, a lot of times the models handles the way they handle blocks, as I said, very unstable. Sometimes the blocks hold on a lot longer, so there could still be some room here for change, and we'll see. We'll see in subsequent runs, and we'll look at the European later on to see if that's doing the same thing. Once that swings eastward, you know, you do have the ridge kind of trying to come back into the west. Uh, the GFS looks like it's trying to be a little bit transitional here. I'm not sure where it's going to wind up going in all of this. You've got a trough from the Gulf of Alaska down to off the Pacific Northwest coast in the long range. It drops it down there. More of the weight of the trough is out in the west as opposed to the east. You do have some energy in the east here. You also have a high rebuilding north of the Azores to Iceland. So perhaps the block may want to try to reestablish itself as we get deeper into December. So there are some questions here as far as where this all goes in the long term. The European last night, the block on the European is there. You can see it here at 120 hours, which is Tuesday night. It extends across Canada from Labrador westward into Saskatchewan, and you've got this upper low that's this complex upper low that's trapped underneath it. Part of that upper low goes out to the east, and then you have this arm that's digging around. Again, it doesn't sharpen. It doesn't. The trough axis doesn't sharpen near the coast. In fact, it keeps it pretty flat and takes it out. And as you go in the long range, actually, the European and the GFS are not that different, where they both break the block down and start to pop up a little bit of a ridge here in the east temporarily as the next system from the west comes in. And again, this would also, again, the European would suggest, much like the GFS is, that when we look in the long term, we're going to see something trying to go to the lake. So uh, think back to days and days ago with storm signals being thrown by models. You have to be careful with that sort of stuff because of the fact that because of that instability in the upper air, and you could certainly wind up seeing it show up in the long range, and then the character of the block changes. It's not as strong. It's in the wrong spot. The troughs and ridges are in the wrong spot, and you don't wind up with the outcome you think you're going to get. So how it plays out on the surface here is we've got the high that moves off the Jersey coast. Now here comes the rain. You'll see that rain here into, this is at 1 o'clock Saturday afternoon, just getting into southeastern Pennsylvania. The GFS is suggesting that it would be warm enough for rain just about everywhere. And again, the Weather Service's forecasts are thinking otherwise. You know, I'm leaning to the idea that the warming may be fast enough that, except in perhaps in some of the valleys where it could get trapped, little tiny little sliver there of the purple that this or pink or whatever that is would be how the GFS sees the very limited area of freezing rain here. As far as the rain is concerned, you do have, you know, on this front, you do have a couple of lows that develop, but there's one now that's kind of being indicated right along the immediate coast. And if that happens, we could see a little bed of heavy rain Saturday night into Sunday morning. This is 1 a.m. Sunday morning. By 8 a.m., the low is you got a low southeast of Montauk on this sort of long occluded front that runs from low pressure near northeast of Lake Superior, and this this arm that extends southeastward, this narrow arm that lifts up. So once that low pulls out, I think weather conditions could improve, and probably improve a bit faster than what the GFS has. And now, of course, you watch back in the Rockies, you got this next system coming out into the plains, and there's your winter storm watches up for the areas that they have them up for. And this looks like it could bring some snow into areas of in Iowa, southern Wisconsin, maybe on the backside to Chicago. And that low is forecast to try to run into the block up into northern Michigan. But what'll probably happen is that'll probably stretch out, and you'll have a secondary low that develops near the coast. But this is a rain event for us as well. The block is not strong enough to push cold air down from northern New England and southeastern Canada. So the surface low manages to get to Lake Huron before it just weakens, and then the coastal low, which develops way too late for any issues here with regards to snow, at least. But it might bring some snows to parts of northern New York, northern Vermont, New Hampshire, and into Maine, if this is correct. And now through the middle of part of next week, you see where this coastal low, look off the Florida coast there, you see a low way out that forms, and that's that trough, that trough behind it that swings around and kind of puts itself right near the coast instead of much further to the west. It's cold air that's behind there, that's in for the latter part of next week. And then you've got this next low that, as we said, in the long range, the models want to take up into the Western Lakes because the block is gone. So, as always, a lot of questions going forward. The character of the block is not showing the kind of character, at least now. It did earlier. Right now, it's not really showing something that would lead to a lot of concern, or maybe even only just a little bit of concern in the longer term, with regards to whether you might have an opportunity for another snow event to be later next week and beyond. But we got to just watch the strength of that block, because that really is going to be the key to all of this. And the models right now are saying that the block is going to eventually just kind of weaken and fall apart. Yes, happy Black Friday, Ralph Corello. Just trying to get things done today. I had a phone issue the last several days. I finally got my phone back, and I'm just kind of sort of struggling with restoring everything to it, which is always a religious experience. Scott Burler, how is this for a stat? Last time Central Park had back-to-back lows in the teens, it was in 1938. Joe Rayo mentioned the other night that his mother remembers her grandfather taking her out during that Thanksgiving, and that there was snow on the ground. 19 Also the 6-inch snowstorm. Actually, I do have it somewhere, and I'll see if I can find it. But around that time, also in 1938, there was some rather cold and bizarre weather over in England and Ireland, with cold and snow. So you had a lot of not just here, but also in northwestern Europe and in the UK. You had some unusually cold and snowy weather during the the latter part of November, beginning of December, back in 1938. I'm going to go take a closer look at what the overall weather was during that time. So, any other questions or comments here, guys? That pretty much sums it up for today with regards to what's going on. So we're going to be trying to do our usual thing this afternoon. I may just sneak out and try to get to a movie for a little while, just to do a little bit of relaxing. Stephen Franco, you were hoping that the block would stay stronger for a longer period of time, and it looks as though the trough wants to set up in the west long term. Well, you know what? This is, again, goes back to where you just get too wrapped, when folks get too wrapped up and too excited. I always like to watch the chatter that goes on in other places and use that as a contrary indicator. And everybody, you get this sort of early appearance of the shot of Arctic air and the snow we had. It, Maybe it's a shot across the bow. Maybe it's telling us that we're setting up for a really cold and snowy winter ahead. On the other hand, it may have maybe it is the only shot, okay, across the bow, and that we are going to see the pattern evolve into something else going into the long term. I just don't know, and I don't know that anyone really knows. You can only look at what's happening when you look at the long range. For me, it's always been that there's just way too much to try to absorb, and that's why I don't spend a whole lot of time and energy on it. The long range. Um, I'm thinking back to November of '89, by the way, where the 11 on that morning of the day after Thanksgiving and the 8-inch snowfall on Thanksgiving Day were the benchmarks for the whole winter. And I don't believe that they were ever taken out. So, there's always that possibility. If the mean trough decides that it's going to eventually settle in the west, you're going to have a problem here. And from the standpoint of winter weather going forward, I'm not saying that it is. Nothing is ever exactly the same. Sometimes it rhymes, though. But there's nothing that suggests that okay, you have this early shot in November like you did correlates to a cold and snowy winter, because it doesn't. It might, and then again it might not. I think there's just too much variability in the atmosphere to suggest that what goes on now is a forebearer of what's going to go on in the future. So as November goes, so goes the winter. This has been a below average month. But I think if you look back on the records in New York City, which is a great record database to look at because they can go back to 1869, if you go back, you may find that there are winters where cold Novembers led to cold and snowy winters, and then I think you'll find that the opposite is true. And it's probably there's enough data there that might suggest that perhaps it's a 50-50 split or a 60-40 split in one direction or another. I don't know that it's a meaningful, statistic to use as far as a forecast is concerned. So we'll let's watch to see how the European handles the block on this run. It's been changing a lot in the last several runs, and that doesn't mean it's done changing. It may wind up changing some more. And as far as the longer term, that's something that we just look at day to day and take out the models to 16 days and see where it takes us. So thanks very much for being here today. Again, I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. For those of you who came on to sample the Patreon live stream, I hope you enjoyed it. As I said, we usually try and do it one live stream a day just for Patreon members, and as well as all the posts that are on the Patreon platform that don't appear everywhere else. And by the way, you can, as a Patreon member, you can message me directly, and I will respond on the Patreon platform to either your comments or to a direct message, which I'm not doing on Facebook anymore. I mean, I am on the posts. I will respond to certain comments, general comments, but with respect to specific weather questions, it's for the folks that are on the Patreon platform, and you guys know that you can talk to me any day and any time. So we'll wrap it up here at this point. Have a great afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your holiday weekend. And we will see you probably at some point tonight. I will do a live YouTube live stream that's open to everybody, and then we'll be back to normal coverage on Saturday. All right, folks, take care. We'll see you later.